Hey, hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. So we are past the heavy theory part about EC2, and now we're going to go on and start getting our hands dirty with EC2. Like I always say, the best way to learn AWS is to start using it. So this is a lab, and you will have to log into the AWS console. Okay, so here I am in the AWS console. If we go over to services, you'll see EC2 under compute. So go ahead and click on that. Now, I would be conscious of your region. Do try and do this in Northern Virginia. EC2 is a per region service. So if you go to Ireland or to London or to Paris, it will spin up EC2 instances in those regions. And you don't get the global view that you do get with S3 or with IAM or with Route 53. So it is a region by region service. So if you've never used EC2, it's going to look exactly like this. You're going to have 0 of everything apart from your default security groups. And what we want to do is we're going to go ahead and hit launch instance. So we're going to launch our instance. Now in here we can click on free tier only. That will make sure we're only using free tier EC2 instances. Throughout the rest of this course, we're going to use the Amazon Linux 2 AMI. So we're going to use this one. But do have a look at all the different AMIs that are available. We've got some Windows ones, we've got just normal Linux ones, so like Ubuntu, for example. We've got some .NET Core, etc., etc. So these are all the different operating systems. So we're going to use the Amazon Linux 2. So go ahead and select that. And then in here, we've got our instance families. So this is Fight Dr. McPixie. This is where you get all the different instance classes. And depending on your region, it depends what is available. So hopefully in Northern Virginia, we should have every one available. I'm going to use a T2 micro because that is free tier eligible. So let's go ahead and hit next to configure our instance details. So in here, we specify the number of instances. We only want one. In here, we could request spot instances. So instead of paying it, by the per second or by minute or by hour, we could just set our spot price. We don't want to do that. And here is our network. Just leave this as default. Basically, you have these things called VPCs, and they're virtual. They're basically like miniature data centers in the cloud. We will cover it off a little bit later, but it is beyond the scope of the Certified Cloud Practitioner course. In here, we've got our different availability zones. So we've got US East 1A, B, C, D, and then E and F. So we've got an awful lot of availability zones. Some regions will only have 2 availability zones, so it depends on the region. Now, interestingly, US East 1A for this AWS account will be actually a different region for another AWS account. And the reason Amazon do that is they don't want everyone just to be selecting 1A because it's the first one. So they actually do randomize it. But again, you don't really need to know that for your cloud practitioner exam. It's just something interesting. So I'm going to say no preference. I want to deploy my EC2 instance into any available availability zone. We're going to leave auto assign public IP address. We want a public IP address to be able to access this instance. Scroll down. We can ignore all the other things. We will cover them off in more detail if you want to go on and do this Certified Solutions Architect Associate. But for now, all you need to do is just basically say we want one instance with no preference. It can be anywhere, and just leave all the options as default. So let's go ahead and add our storage. So that we've just configured our EC2 instance. This is going to be our virtual hard disk in the cloud. So this is our EBS instance. And in here, we can change our volume types. So we've got general purpose, we've got provisioned IOPS, we've got our magnetic standard. And you can only boot, the reason you only get 3 options here is you can only boot from these 3 different classes. So from GP2, IO1, and then magnetic standard. If we were to add another volume in here, you'll see that we get more. So we get our cold hard disk drive, we get our throughput optimized. So these are our normal magnetic drives that we covered off in the last lecture. We don't really need them for this one, so I'm just going to do standard purpose GP2. We're going to go in and add our tags. So let's add a few tags. We're going to add in our name. So we're going to call this web server 01. I'm going to add another tag, so this will be my department, who owns this web server. Well, I'm going to say it's our applications team. And then let's add another department, employee ID. So employee, and then ID. So which employee has spun this one up? And I'm just going to enter my ID in there. So let's go ahead and configure our security groups. So we are going to create a new security group. I'm going to call this WebDMZ. WebDMZ. Now you might be wondering, what is a security group? Well, a security group is basically just a virtual firewall in the cloud. And let me explain this in something that will make it very easy to understand. So let's talk about how computers communicate. But before we even get to that, let's talk about human beings and how we work. So you've got your eye, and your eye is designed for one purpose. It's designed to see. And in fact, it's designed to interpret light, to make sense of light. And it works from various different wavelengths. There's some wavelengths that your eye can't see, but your eye can see an awful lot of different wavelengths. It can see all the colors in the rainbow, for example. So your basically light is transmitted, and your eye receives light and makes sense of that information. Likewise, your ear will hear music or hear sound, and likewise your skin can feel heat. So that's the way human beings work. You know, we have different parts of our body, and they can each interpret different sources of information. And computers actually work in exactly the same way. So we've got Linux computers. Linux computers talk over SSH. So this is on port 22. Windows PCs, they talk to each other using Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP. And this is on a different port called port 3389. And then things like HTTP, HTTPS, they all talk on different ports. So HTTP works on port 80, HTTPS works on port 443. Now, computers on the internet can be flooded with information. They can get information from port 22, 3389, port 80, port 443. And this, you may want to restrict who is trying to talk to your computer, you know, someone trying to control your computer. And that's exactly what a firewall does. And this is an old school firewall. So firewalls enable communications through different ports. So if you wanted to let everything in, you would let everything in on what's called a CIDR address range. So it's just this IP address of 0.0.0.0/0. And when you put that address range in, it's saying, hey, just let everything in on this port. So let everything in on port 21, or let everything in on port 80. And depending on the port, you may want to let everything in, or you may not. So web servers, for example, if you've got a web server, the whole purpose of the web server is to give web content out to anyone that requests it. So you would want port 80 open to the entire world. But if you've got a Linux server that you just want to administer your own, let's say on port 22, so SSH port, you may just want to lock that down to only your IP address. So you would want to let everything in on port 80, but you may want to lock everything down to your own IP address. And we use this /32 notation. So you would enter your public IP address in here, where these 4 X's are, and then the /32 just means only one address is allowed in on this port. So that's what we're doing here. SSH works on port 22, and we're going to allow this open to the whole world. Now, you could just hit my IP, and Amazon will automatically specify your public IP address down to the /32. So if you do my IP, it means that only you can SSH into this web server. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages to this. The advantage is it's very secure. No one else will be able to connect into it. The disadvantage is, however, that if your IP address changes, you're going to have to go in and change this rule. So for the rest of this course, we're just going to say anywhere. We're going to use 0.0.0.0. You're always going to get a warning message, because it's really not a wise idea to do that normally, especially for this port. But for web traffic, that's what web servers do, right? They want to be able to respond to web requests. So we're going to go in and open up port HTTP, and that operates on port 80. And we're going to open that up to the whole world. And this is IP4 and this is IP6 notation. So that's all we're doing in here. So I want you to open up SSH and HTTP, so port 22 and port 80 to anywhere in the world. Let's go ahead and hit review and launch. And now we're going to go ahead and hit launch. In here, it's going to create a key pair. So a key pair is just a way of us being able to log into our EC2 instances. And there's 2 types of keys in asymmetric cryptography. You've got your public keys and you've got your private keys. And the way I like to think of this is your public key is just like a padlock. You can go and put your padlock, and you can have like hundreds of copies of this padlock, and you can, put it on your bike, you can put it on your locker, locker, you can put it on your front door, and the only thing that can open that padlock is a key. And you only really want to have one copy of your key because then only you control it. So you can have multiple copies of your public key, but you only really want one copy of your private key. And your private key is used to open your public key. So it's just used to open your padlock. It's the easiest way to think of this. So what we need to do is we need to create a new key pair. I'm going to call my key pair my private key. Just keep it really simple. And I'm going to download this now. So you do need to definitely download this because you can only create it once. Once you've downloaded it, let's go ahead and hit Launch Instances. So that is now launching. If we click here on View Instances, it will spin up here in a few seconds or even a few minutes, depending on how quick it is in your availability zone in your region. So I'm just going to pause the video and I'm going to wait for this to come up online. Okay, so here is my EC2 instance. It is now in the instant state of running. It's now in the US East 1C availability zone. Your availability zone may be different. Over here is my public IP address, and I need to use this to connect into it. If you go down here, you'll see the little copy to clipboard icon. So just click on that. That is now in my clipboard. Now, depending on whether or not you're using Mac or if you're using Windows, the next steps vary. So I'm just going to continue this on for Mac users. For Windows users, please jump to 14 minutes and 5 seconds. So Mac users, if you go into Finder and you click on Applications, we can scroll all the way down to Utilities, and in Utilities you'll see this thing called Terminal. So I want you to open that up. So I'm in Terminal. I'm just going to go View into Full Screen, and I'm in the A Cloud Guru directory. You'll be in whatever directory what you call your home screen, and then all you need to do is type in CD and then Downloads, and that will take you to your Downloads directory. If you type LS, that means List, you'll be able to see the private key that you downloaded. So mine's called myprivatekey.pem, and what we need to do first of all is just change the permissions on this. So we need to do chmod and then 400 and then the name of our key. So it's myprivatekey.pem and hit enter. Once we've done that, let's clear the screen to keep it simple. And then all we need to do to to connect into our EC2 instance is type ssh ec2-user and then @ Then we paste in our public IP address, and then it's minus, and then I, and then it's the name of the key. So it's myprivatekey.pem. Go ahead and hit enter. It'll ask you if you're sure you want to continue to connect. I'm going to type in yes. And there we go. We can see it's my Amazon Linux to AMI. Now, if for some reason it's timing out, the very first thing you should do is check that port 22 is open on your security group. So I'll just quickly show you how to do that. So back in the EC2 screen, all you need to do is click on security groups under network and security. So click in there and just select the security group. So it's your MyWebDMZ. Click on inbound and just make sure that port 22 is open to the entire world. If you're still having trouble connecting, a lot of networks, so if you're in a library or if you're at your workplace, a lot of networks just block port 22. So you need to find a way to get around your network restrictions. I would just try and tether to my mobile phone. That often works. That's normally 99% of the calls is people block port 22. Or you have to go and try this at home. So hopefully you can get past that bit. So I'm back in my terminal window. I'm going to just clear the screen. We're going to elevate our privileges to root. So we do that by typing sudo su, and this gives us root level access. So we are now a root user. You can see it says root over here. And root gives us admin access. It allows us to do anything that we want. And so now what we might want to do is type in yum and then update and then -yes. And this will update our EC2 instances with all the latest security patches. So that is now updating it with all the latest security patches, and that's it. And there we go, it's complete. So Mac users, you can now skip to the end of this lecture. I'm now just going to switch over for Windows users so they understand how they can connect in. Okay, so I'm here on my Windows PC, and what I need to do is just go over to the start bar and click on the start bar. And then what we need to do is we need to go down and find Putty. So scroll all the way down till you see Putty. Click in Putty, and the first thing we need to do is just go over to PuttyGen. And what we're going to do is generate our PPK file. So we're turning our PEM file into a PPK file. So click on Load an Existing Private Key File.
And then what you need to do is navigate to where you downloaded this. So for me, it was in my downloads directory. And then make sure you change this here to all files because it's only going to show you PPKs. So mine's mywebserver.pem. Go ahead and open that up. And then once you've loaded that, it will say successfully imported foreign key. Click OK. And then what we want to do is go ahead and save our private key. And it says, do you want to save this without a passphrase? I'm going to say yes. And that saves it into our PPK. So I'm going to call it my web server, but instead of PEM, just PPK. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And then that saves it into my download directory. Once you've done that, you can close putty key gen here and then go back down to putty and open up just normal putty directory. And then we want to open up putty. And then what we want to do now is the very first thing we want to do is go over to SSH here and go to our auth. And then in here, we need to enter our private key. So we go to browse and then open up your private key, which is mywebserver.ppk. Then we go back up to our session, and then what we want to do is type in our public IP address in here. So back in the AWS console, we just click on services, go to EC2 and grab your public IP address. And here we go. My public IP address is just over here. If I scroll across, so it's 35.176.116.168. Copy that into your clipboard. We go back over to putty, paste it in here, and then just go ahead and click save, and that will save your settings. And then just click on the IP address and go open, and you should have no issues. And just paste it up in here as well, and then go ahead and hit open. It may prompt you for a username, so you just have to type in EC2-user, like so. Hit enter, and there you go, you're logged in to your Amazon Linux AMI on a Windows machine. Now, if you do have network connectivity issues, a lot of corporate networks block SSH, so try going out via your phone or try doing this at home. That's 9 times out of 10 is the issue. The other thing you can just go back and double check is if you click on here and then go down to your security group and make sure your security group has SSH open to the world. So it's under security groups, and then click on your web DMZ and then click on inbound, and your SSH port is port 22, and it's got to have this 0.0.0.0/O.
So on to my exam tips. Well, congratulations, you've provisioned your first EC2 instance. You've taken a step into a much wider world. Just remember that EC2 is a compute-based service. It's not serverless. It's an actual virtual server in the cloud. Remember that you need to connect in to EC2 using a private key. And I said a private key is just like a key that you want to keep, and a public key is just like a padlock. So you use your private key to unlock your padlock. You don't want to share your private key with anyone. Then we learned that computers, like human beings, communicate in a whole bunch of different variety of ways. So Linux servers, if you want to administer them, you use SSH, and that's on port 22. Microsoft computers or Windows servers, if you want to administer them, you use the RDP or Remote Desktop Protocol. That sits on port 3389. We then also learned that things like HTTP and HTTPS, they work on port 80 and port 443. And basically, when you're using a security group, you're basically using a virtual firewall. So this is an old school, very old school Cisco ASA 5505. These are the very first firewalls I used to use when I was a solutions architect. Nowadays, everything's done through virtual firewalls, and they're using security groups. So when we want to let everything in, we just allow everything on 0.0.0.0/O. If we want to let just one IP address in, we use the private or the public IP address and then /32. The /32 means this IP address only. That's all the difference is. And so, like I said, security groups are virtual firewalls in the cloud. You need to open up ports in order to use them. Popular ports are SSH, HTTP, HTTPS, and RDP. And then finally, we should always design for failure. So if you're going to have a production website, you should always have one EC2 instance in at least one availability zone, and you should have at least 2. EC2. So you have one in one availability zone, one in another availability zone, and then that way if one goes down, the other one will serve the traffic. So remember that. So well done everyone. You've provisioned your first EC2 instance. I hope you had lots of fun. In the next lecture, we're going to look at how we can get our hands dirty with this EC2 instance. So far we've been interacting with AWS using the console. So, we've been going into EC2, IAM, S3. We've been using the graphical user interface or GUI. In the next lecture, we're going to look at how we can use the command line. And the great thing about our little EC2 instance is it was already installed with the command line tools. So we'll be able to use the command line to go and do things like make S3 buckets, for example. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you.